Firstly, obviously, a really warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this webinar. Are you ready for the new normal? This is very much a practical session for everybody today, where the team here will be guiding you through how to return to the office, and not just from the physical place, but the most important part, which is your people. So engaging with your team, supporting their well-being, whilst ensuring that productivity that we obviously all need from a business point of view. What we all know is that one size certainly doesn't fit all. We all have our own businesses and we all have our own individual challenges. And what we do hope over the next hour is that we really will help to get you to answer some of those questions for you. A couple of really quick housekeeping notes before we start. For those that were there at the very beginning, I just said that we have the chat board facility going on here. So please do put any of your questions on there, answer any questions from your own experiences with people as well. We will get to a Q&A at the end of the session, and we will try and get through as much of that as we possibly can. Also as well, because there's so many people joining today, to help with the bandwidth, we have made sure that there's restrictions on using audio and the video and audio on it as well. So the chat board is really important for everybody. So quick introductions before we kick off. Today we're joined by two of my wonderful colleagues. First is Phil Muir and Mo Gillespie. Phil comes from a traditional architecture background. He very much has a focus on workplace consultancy and joined the space team just over 8 years ago. Phil has led a very high number of high-profile public sector and estate rationalisation projects, as well as design and fit-out projects across education and large corporations across Scotland. Our second speaker today is Mo, who joined us just over 2 years ago. Mo has over 18 years experience as a move and change leader and has worked across the UK and abroad in that time. Mo gets the complexities of change. Her capacity to identify best practice and highlight an effective process in every given situation is always pretty impressive for us all to see. And finally, we're really delighted that Jennifer Duckworth could join us today. Jen is a work psychologist and a workplace wellbeing consultant with her own consultancy, Babel Projects. Jen really does drive the people aspects, such as employee wellbeing, behavior, change management, organizational development and training. And she has a real true passion for what she does, linking the scientific research with her own operational HR experience to deliver practical guidance and tools that actually do work and make a genuine difference to people every single day. Jen has most recently worked with Loughborough University, Network Rail and HarperCollins publishers. So now the introductions are over, please just a final reminder, add on your questions to the chat board, and I'll now pass over to Phil to start the webinar off for us. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Sophie, and hello, everyone. So at Space, like many others, we are preparing for reopening our offices, and it seems that this may be possible by the middle of July, in line with relaxation phase 3 of the Scottish Government route map. At Space, from our return to office group with the aim of preparing the place for the people and the people for the place. And that group has 5 key strands, as you see there: QHSE, space planning, building capacity, HR change management, technology, and FM. I'm going to speak about the building capacity element in relation to physical distancing in an office space, although the principles can be applied to all building types. And we're currently advising a number of clients on this. I'll run you through an example of the implications. You'll all have seen, I'm sure, the HM government guidance document, Working Safely During COVID-19 in Offices and Contact Centres, and be familiar with the Scottish Government COVID-19 route map I referred to earlier, where non-essential offices can be reopened within phase 3. In phase 3, the advice is still to work from home if you can, but if you need to work from the office, you should apply 2-metre physical distancing guidelines. So here we have an example of an office common entrance space. This is an office that's got some public access to it with an element of security screening. So firstly, we've introduced a one-way system, separate entrance and exit doors, with the doors having been converted to automatic opening to reduce physical contact points. The stair needs to be used for both up and down here, so we've introduced a keep left one-way system. Floor signage has been used in the lobby to allow people queuing for security to stay 2 metres apart whilst awaiting screening. And there's some debate currently as to whether this may need to be extended out into the street during busy periods. This client has elected to take the temperature of visitors. We're seeing a mixed uptake in this. There's some question as to how effective it is in discovering if someone is infected with COVID-19. This building also has 6 stories and 3 lifts, and the landlord is asking anyone travelling as far as the 2nd floor to please use the stairs. Beyond that, it's 1 person in a lift at a time. Hand sanitisers are being installed at key touch points in the buildings. Clearing regimes are being amended for more frequent targeted cleaning of areas. And the requirements for physical distancing is reducing capacity of WCs also, with many having to revert to 1 in, 1 out. This next slide shows a typical large office floor. The circle at the top right of the screen is how we graphically apply the physical distancing requirements onto a plan. So we have a person at the centre of the circle, and the red circle represents a 2 metre radius of what we call a hot zone to represent the physical distancing guidelines. So what one person's hot zone shouldn't overlap with another person at the centre of an adjacent hot zone. So graphically, the red circle should never cross a green dot. We go through the exercise of applying these hot zones to workstations and meeting room chairs. We also take into account circulation routes, so both primary circulation, main access across the space, but secondary circulation also for access to desks. So when we do this to the open plan office areas, you can see that only 29% of the available desks are usable with applying distancing. The meeting rooms are even worse off. 16 of the 72 available chairs can be used, or 22%. So these available desks and unavailable desks will clearly be signed as being to be used or not to be used. An added complication here is that HM government advice is to avoid desk sharing if possible. However, we are seeing clients impose targeted cleaning regimes to allow a desk to be used by different people on separate days with their own keyboards, mice, etc. held in lockers. Desk phones are a key touch point. Some clients are moving to headsets where possible to encourage people to not have these touch points, but really trying to encourage uptake in Microsoft Teams or Zoom, something we've all had to become familiar with very, very quickly. Looking particularly at a large meeting room, applying the physical distancing here to the existing layout reduces the capacity drastically to 12.5% of the available chairs. But at the bottom you see, with some minor tweaking to the space plan, we can double that capacity just with some clever changes. However, we need to be careful about the sequence of access and egress in and out of the room to avoid people compromising the physical distancing. Really, it's last in, first out in a room like this. And it seems obvious, but the higher the occupation density of a room, the greater the effect of physical distancing. We're seeing this in schools where we're looking at high density assembly halls, for example, with fixed seating. They can be down at 8% capacity. High density classrooms are also affected, but however, the move in recent years to more reconfigurable spaces means that there are opportunities to increase capacity simply by reconfiguring seating. So a few summary points. People need to look at standard process for access, egress and circulation around their buildings, to expect reduced capacities at less than 30%. And for the smaller of the meeting rooms being knocked out as meeting rooms, they could be down at 1 person, available space because of social distancing. But this can be maximised with some space planning. Also, we're looking at some material demands, things like perspex screening. I've seen this a lot at reception desks. There's a huge demand for this at the moment. Also, anti-slip vinyls for floor signage are in a little bit of short supply, so everyone's looking for these materials, so lead times are going up here. Also, changing in government guidelines, you'll have seen a bit of momentum around looking to reduce the physical distancing guidelines. A review has been commissioned by the UK government, which will conclude on the 4th of July. Canada, Spain and the UK are currently at 2 metre physical distancing. China, Denmark and France are at 1 metre, in line with the World Health Organization guidelines. Germany, Greece and Italy, Australia, to name a few, are in the middle at 1.5 metres. At Space, we modelled this on our own office to look at the effect of these various scenarios, and we're having 22 available desks in a pre-normal situation. 6 were usable at 2 metres, 9 at 1.5 metres, and 16 were available at 1 metre. So where does this leave us? So in the middle of July, we may get the green light to reopen non-essential office buildings. You'll have seen that capacities will be drastically reduced, and continuing advice will be to work from home if you can. Moving from an enforced home working situation to one where a reduced office capacity is available will be a big challenge for organisations large and small. Establishing that office capacity protocols is almost the easy part of the jigsaw. How are organisations going to respond to this and get their people ready for the new normal, where an element of home working has to be here to stay? So with that, I will hand you over to Mo.
Thank you very much, Phil. Just give me a second while I do the technical bit. This is me taking back control, a phrase we've heard a lot. Okay, I think that's me. Yeah. So yes, thanks, Phil, for that summary there. It's really useful. And I think, you know, what you should take from that there's going to be a considerable reduction of space available in the office. I mean, that's just taken as read. And when that happens, it's going to become more important than ever to ensure that this space is being used by your people in the most productive way possible. So how would you begin to establish how to do this? As Sophie mentioned at the beginning, every organisation is unique, and the priorities for one business may differ greatly from that of another. So you need information to get this right, and to get that information, you do need to start asking pertinent questions. So the first logical step would be to undertake a consultation with your leadership and with your wider teams. And the key here, as with any consultation, is not to make any assumptions. Processes and team dynamics may have changed considerably since the enforced lockdown in March. And it doesn't have to be an onerous process, but it should be meaningful. So ask your questions to find out how your teams have been coping during lockdown, what's worked well, and where there have been challenges. And importantly, the key question here is to find out the tasks and processes that your managers and teams cannot do from home. There may be some tasks which have been very difficult, or they've had some less than effective workarounds implemented. What are they? Are these the critical tasks which actually need to be performed in the office? And do try and engage with your staff properly. Don't assume that as managers that your experience is going to be replicated throughout your team. Your personal challenges may not be the same as your employees' difficulties. So please do engage with them meaningfully. And don't forget that businesses thrive on innovation and continuous improvement. So this is actually an ideal time to capture and develop those opportunities to continue with best practice, the things that have worked really well, and not to revert back to the old ways. So do look for the positives, because there are many. For example, you know, with the sudden necessity to use a lot more or have a lot more reliance on online technology, businesses are reporting more streamlined, focused meetings, more face-to-face collaboration, both internally and externally. Having captured the broad picture through leadership consultations, including all those very important key activities which need to be performed in the office environment, you now need to drill down into the detail of each staff member's specific requirements. And the objective of undertaking individual employee assessments is to establish each member as predominantly either home or office-based. And keep in mind that you may only have, as Phil went at pains to point out there, possibly less than 30% of your office space available for a considerable period of time. So you need to ensure that those staff members who genuinely have a need to use the office are able to. Now, we've internally developed some useful tools to help us with this process, and we're covering the following sort of principal considerations. Firstly, it's really important that you involve HR, as they should be aware of any personal requirements, for example, health shielding reasons, why specific individuals should continue to work safely from home. And equally, there may be employees who, for personal reasons, have a very difficult home situation that you do not know about, but these people may necessarily be prioritised for the office. You also need to review the suitability of your employees' home environments and whether they have the space, the furniture, the technology to continue working from home on a long-term basis. Because a lot of people have made do for the last 3 months, might need some adjustments made if they're to continue working from home on a longer-term basis in a safe manner. Look at how they actually commute to the office. You might have a staff member who is high priority for working in the office, but who lives miles away and can't feasibly walk or cycle into work. Maybe this person could be allocated a manager's parking space for the duration, or maybe they could vary their hours to avoid rush hour on public transport. And of course, linking back to the leadership consultations, you need to identify those employees who undertake the tasks which cannot be carried out at home. Don't assume that the requirement to be in the office is hierarchical, and I've seen a wee bit of this in some organisations. If you can imagine a higher paid senior manager with plenty of space and privacy at home versus perhaps a young graduate who's flat sharing with 3 others, all competing for space and working on their beds. And I know this is happening in London particularly. So who of those two has more need to come into the office? And considering all of this, you should be able to categorise your staff into predominantly home or office workers, which will help inform how you use that very limited space in the office. And when the assessment is complete, you'll find that you may need to review your personnel contracts. You might need to, just for a while, change your employee's primary workplace to their home on a temporary basis. And obviously there's implications that go along with this. Okay, once you've undertaken the exercise, you then need to start, I need to start working out how to use this slide properly. Once you've undertaken the exercise, you do need to start looking at making adjustments to enable safer home working for those who continue to use their home as their primary workplace for the medium term. As I said before, you might find that there's been a tendency to make do with a kitchen chair and a laptop, but for continued homework, it would be beneficial to ensure that those staff have a proper ergonomic setup. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that you have to open an account at IKEA and go and furnish staff with desks and task chairs, but you should consider using equipment from the office and redistributing it to those that need it. Because remember, always remember, about 70% of your workstations could be unusable. So why not use the kit from these desks? Conduct audits to identify what you have and also what's already been taken home, and map out who needs what and where it's needed. You can ask the staff to obviously undertake online DSE assessments to get that right and to ascertain what they need, and then use surplus task chairs, monitors, etc. to enhance their setup. And you should do all this in a coordinated manner so that you know exactly where your assets are, as they obviously could be distributed far and wide. If you control the process and distribute centrally, for example, using a removal contractor to deliver out to people's homes, it will be a lot easier. And also asking staff to come into the office to pick up what they need is unnecessarily risky and also could lead to a lot of chaos in terms of your asset lists. So working through the employee assessments, each person's new primary workplace is where they need the proper ergonomic setup for the next few months. And then the other place, which is either the home or the office, becomes their touchdown area, and they don't need as much equipment there. Okay. So having established broadly who needs to be in the office and who should continue working from home, you do need to recognise that home workers will probably want to spend at least some time in the office periodically to help strengthen their sense of community and belonging, if nothing else. Space actually conducted a survey back in April, and we found that the thing that the people missed most about not being in the office was exactly this. It's the lack of connection, the lack of bonding, which occurs more naturally in the office environment. So the office is still very much viewed as an essential cornerstone for fostering that workplace culture and workplace relationships. And many staff are eager to get back to the office for this one reason. So how do you manage this? You might want to consider implementing a simple online booking system for those usable desks and possibly for meeting rooms. There are some good, very cost-effective deals out there which can help you in the medium term if you don't already have a booking system in place. They're actually very, very cheap. So you could reserve some of your usable desks for those key predominantly office-based staff, and then allow free booking on the remainder for occasional users. And I did want to say a word here about team rotations, because I do know that some organizations, and maybe your organization is considering this, and this is where employees are split into Team A, Team B, Team C, for example, and access to the office is then rotated by team so that everybody spends an equal amount of time in the office. But I mean, personally, and this is a personal opinion, I've yet to be persuaded of this because it's quite a rigid approach. You're effectively asking staff to come into the office on set days and with the same people each time, rather than using the office when they have a need to. So instead, what I'm suggesting is if you adopt a visible online booking system, staff can potentially self-manage this. For example, you could call a colleague and ask them to swap their desk booking on a particular day if you've got a specific need to come into the office on that day. And all of this will help keep the office very much as an activity-based destination, rather than us rolling back to the bad old days of presenteeism. And with government guidance recommending continued home working where possible for safety reasons, it just does seem a little bit counterintuitive to expect staff to work regularly in the office when they perhaps don't really need to. Again, of course, massive caveat is that all organisations' priorities will vary massively. So always a consultative, tailored approach to all of this is recommended in every case. Once all the detail and the strategy has been determined and the post-lockdown operating model for your business has been established, you do need to focus on communicating this properly. So clear protocols for working in the office will need to be developed. And this does link back to what Phil was talking about earlier about having a return to office working group, which covers FM, safety, security, cleaning, distancing rules. All of that has to be brought together and brought into a clear protocols document. It should include clear messaging about use of meeting rooms, visitor policies. Are you in fact even going to allow visitors to come to your office? And it obviously needs to include specific COVID-related emergency procedures if people become unwell, etc., when they're on site. You should also look at home working protocols as well, because they may not yet be formalised in your organisation. So have a look at that and make sure it's got a focus on lone working and safety, as well as wellness, connectivity with the wider organisation. And generally, regular staff communications are just really important. There might be a few people in your organisation, yourself included, who've been completely immersed in this return to office strategy planning, but remember that a lot of the workforce, the majority of the workforce, might be feeling a bit isolated and in need of a bit of information. So keep communicating properly. You can never go wrong with too much communication. And don't forget to include staff on furlough, because they need to know these messages as well. And they're more likely to be returning to work over the next few weeks and months in a phased basis. So they need to have the same robust messaging, the same protocols documents, and they need to understand fully what's happening before they recommence work. And finally, best laid plans and all of that. I just wanted to touch on the need for resilience. We don't know what we're going to be hit with next. And the examples that I've included here are all potentially likely scenarios. You know, not least Phil mentioned before that there's a high chance that the changes to distancing guidelines could come into force. And in the result of any of these things happening, you may need to assess your office capacities quite quickly in light of this. As the track, trace, isolate plans ramp up, you might have recurring cycles, for example, of staff being asked to self-isolate for 14 days at a time, which, if they're able to work from home and they're not symptomatic, that might not be too difficult to handle. But if they're key workers in the office environment, you need to have a plan for this. What happens if you have to shut the office quickly in the event of a localized outbreak within your premises? Are you able to move back with ease to mass home working? We can spend time and resources on this detailed returning to the office strategy, but we need to ensure that we retain flexibility and be ready to adapt quickly in these changing times. And without doubt, your first plan will require absolute tweaking, and that's fine. It's good practice to get into. And achieving the optimal workplace is a continuing iterative process in normal times, let alone during a pandemic. So be agile, be prepared to adapt quickly in the event of continued disruptions, which we're all expecting. So I guess in summary, focus on home working as a longer term reality rather than a short term enforced fix. And this will help you stay resilient through the pre-vaccine months. And with that, I'll hand over to Jen, who as a work psychologist is extremely well equipped to help you ensure that your remote workforce is fully supported through this time.
Great. Thank you very much, Mo. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining the webinar today. And thank you to Mo for that nice introduction. I'm really pleased to be here supporting Space today. As Mo highlighted, home working will probably be very much remain an important aspect of our lives for the foreseeable future. And what I'm hearing is that one of the biggest challenges is for line managers, supporting staff all over the place and keeping on top of their own day-to-day work. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So what I'm going to be covering with you today is how line managers can best work with their people to support their own engagement and motivation, and then also try to get you thinking also about protecting your own well-being. And if you're not a line manager on today's session, don't worry, I'm sure you'll still pick up lots of useful insights that will help you at work. So first of all, a little bit about me. My career began in HR, over 15 years experience in a range of businesses. Sophie's covered a lot of this earlier in her fantastic intro for me, so I don't need to go over it all again. I just wanted to add that I often run academic research projects as well, and I really enjoy using research and evidence to inform the solutions that I discuss with my clients. And for today, I'm going to introduce you to two frameworks that have been validated and tested many times through psychological research. And I'm going to use those to provide some grounding to the advice and the tips that I'll give you today. But before we get into those frameworks, I just want to set the scene with you and give you an overview of some of the challenges and the opportunities that remote working can present from a psychological perspective. As I run through these, you can have a think about how many of these you may have experienced. I know that I certainly have experienced my fair share of them. So the first one is work-life balance. That's about the flexibility that home working gives us can actually be really great for our work-life balance. But at the same time, at the moment, a lot of us may also be experiencing real conflict between our two worlds of home and work, because we're trying to do everything at the same time from the same place. Then in terms of technology, obviously a lot of us are lucky enough to have great tech at home, which is really going to help us home working to connect with our colleagues and our friends and family as well. But it can also be problematic for some people as it hinders us in switching off from work and relaxing at the end of the day. Then working with others, obviously that's a bit harder at the moment because we can't all be together physically. But some people are actually enjoying the quieter space and the focus that they can get without the distraction. For example, if they're normally in a big open plan office. And then lastly, communication. We can't interact on a face-to-face basis, so there's potential there for misunderstandings or lack of clarity sometimes. But on the flip side, I'm also hearing from some people that they feel like they're getting more regular structured team meetings now. And some experts say our listening skills may even be developing because we're dealing with technology and the challenges that present. So that was just a quick overview of some of the themes. These are all going to keep coming up as I go through the bulk of my presentation. Okay, so you may be sitting there thinking, wow, given all these challenges, what can I really do to help my teams? But the short answer is there's plenty that line managers can do. As psychologists, we know there's lots of evidence to show that good line management is one of the key elements of promoting staff well-being, which is linked to more engaged, more productive, and more committed workforces. And so here's the first framework that I wanted to share with you. It's called the 6 Core Principles for Good Management. Some of you may recognise this framework. It actually forms the basis for the Health and Safety Executive Management Standards tool, And there's lots and lots of research out there that shows us that these 6 areas are really important for our health and for our productivity. They're actually also key sources of stress in the workplace if they're not managed well. So what I'm going to do is just run through each of these areas in turn and give you a quick overview and some key questions you could ask yourself, and also some kind of top tips that you can start doing from tomorrow. And this is going to be packaged up into a neat summary that you can use as a checklist. You'll be able to access that from my website after the webinar. And actually, if you're watching this live, then it'll also come out on an email to you tomorrow, I believe, or in due course. So the first principle that I wanted to talk through with you are job demands. So demands are inherent in any job. We all have them. We'd be bored if we didn't. They're things like our workload, our time pressures, the hours that we have to work, and different elements within our work environment. And the potential, there's potentially more demands as well in the potential return to the office that Mo and Phil have been talking about, because people may then have to juggle between the 2 places, and also managers may have to manage people in 2 different places. In terms of home working, the evidence tells us that we actually tend to work longer hours from home than we would in the office, or many people do. And people often also find it hard to establish boundaries between their work life and their home life. And that can be exacerbated a bit at the moment because we don't have that daily commute, which provides a transition between our home, our work, and then back to home again. So that can cause additional problems. And also some people aren't great at taking regular breaks as well when they're at home. So all of those different conditions you can imagine can add up to a difficult situation for an individual and potentially result in burnout, working too hard and not having boundaries. So there's lots to consider there for a line manager. So here are a couple of things that you could be asking yourself as a manager, thinking about your staff workloads and working hours, and then also thinking about the demands that the different members of your team have in their own work environments. Mo mentioned earlier the difference between different people within the organisations, and that's exactly what I'm thinking here now too. There's a good phrase that I've heard recently that really illustrates this, and it goes like this: we're all experiencing the same storm, but we're each in different boats. So I think that's really nice to help us just keep an open mind and think about the different boats that your staff might be in. And the top tip here is think about ground rules, think about some protocols that you can develop with your teams if you haven't already. Agree what your working hours are, agree perhaps not to send emails to each other after a certain time, and agree to take regular breaks throughout the day. And stick to them. And the way to get your team to stick to them is for you to role model good behaviours yourself and communicate what you're doing. Okay, so the next principle that I want to talk through is control. Control is really important for our well-being, both in our work and in our home lives. In this context, it's all about how much say a person has over their where they do their work, when they do their work, and how they do their work. And the research shows us that the more control we have, the better we can manage our demands. Normally, choosing to work from home gives us a really great sense of control. But actually, at the moment, because it's mandatory and compulsory for many, many people, you may not see quite the same level of benefits because there isn't that choice element there. One good thing, potentially, to come out of the pandemic that many people are talking about at the moment, however, is that managers who were previously reluctant to perhaps let their people work from home now haven't got so much choice in the matter, and people are working from home and they're seeing that it can work. And this is really great news because it helps managers build trust in their teams. They can start to judge performance by outputs and about what their team delivers. And then people are also being allowed a little bit more autonomy around how they deliver their work. So again, here's a couple of questions that you can be asking yourself and your teams. You can reflect a bit on your management style. Do I usually empower people in my team by allowing them some control? And what kind of control would each member of my staff like? And you can talk to them and ask them about that. And then try giving your team members some control over decisions that will impact them. So for example, Mo was talking earlier about the importance of consultation with your teams when you're planning this return to the office. So that's a great way to allow people some control, if you can, around, for example, planning arrival times, commuting, that sort of thing. Okay, so the third key principle is support. Really, really important for our well-being. And as psychologists, we talk about instructional support and emotional support. The first one is about getting the help and the information that you need to do your job well. And the emotional support is obviously linked to feelings and worries or concerns you might have, and being able to talk that through with somebody. And as a line manager, you're really well positioned to help people with both these types of support. However, it might feel a bit harder to offer and receive support right now because we don't have that informal face-to-face time with people like we would in an office situation. Also, we know that the pandemic has created lots of new anxieties and worries for many of us. A third of people in the UK, studies are saying, are reporting that they've had their mental health negatively impacted, which is unsurprising. And over 10% of people are apparently experiencing mental health challenges for the first time. So again, this slide gives you a couple of questions to think about. What kind of support does each team member need from me? And what kind of support does my organisation offer? Now, this will depend on the size of your organisation, the kind of culture that's in place at the moment. That some organisations will have HR services, maybe counselling through employee assistance programmes. So you don't need to necessarily feel as a line manager that you have to have all the solutions. You may be able to link into external agencies. And even if your businesses don't have in-house things, there's lots of external agencies that provide great online resources like Mind, the mental health charity, and also goodthinking.co.uk. They've got some great resources as well. And the top tip here is just simply to set aside time for one-to-one catch-ups where you don't just focus on tasks and the to-do list and getting through that, the transactional stuff. You're also just asking people how they're doing. And that's the top tip in that area. Okay, number 4, we're getting through this. Relationships. This is all about promoting positive working and resolving conflict within teams. Again, the challenge here is that obviously people aren't together, so they're not able as easily to develop their relationships. The Zoom and the MS Teams that we are using at the moment can be good for meetings, but what they can't recreate are those little spontaneous social moments, like going to the kitchen to make a cup of tea and bumping into someone, or chatting in the lifts about your weekend. And I know that I really miss those kind of moments as well. And they're really important because they're the glue that holds our relationships together. So returning to the office space, as Mo said earlier, even if it's in a very gradual fashion, should present some good opportunities here, because face-to-face meeting will help cultures kind of maintain that great sense of community and reaffirm the company culture and values. In the meantime, however, there are some steps that you can take as a manager to try and promote strong relationships. So think about what things look like in the team at the moment, how strong the relationships are, and think about how you can develop certain opportunities for team members to work together. So rather than have people working individually on lots of different things, if you can put people together in small groups to work on projects, that will really help them build and maintain their relationship even though they're apart. And also under the top tip there, it talks about highlighting team goals and team objectives and making sure you talk about those regularly and celebrate wins together. Because if you're talking about shared goals, that can really build trust between your people and give them a bit of a psychological bond because they're all striving for the same result. Okay, role clarity, the 5th one. So this is really about whether people understand their role and their fit within the organisation. Obviously at the moment we've got a really dynamic environment and things are changing regularly. And the chances are that many of you listening today may have shifted your focus in your role. I know I have over the last couple of months, and you may have asked your staff to do the same. And if roles are changing, then training and mentoring will need to be available as well. And unfortunately, L&D budgets are sometimes the first things that go if organisations are in crisis mode. And potentially people will be missing out on informal learning that takes place in the office when they're just chatting over desks. And that's especially the case for new hires or for more junior members of staff. So what you can do is be thinking about, are your staff absolutely clear on their role and their priorities, and check in with them on that? and think about the best way to communicate what your expectations are, and also double check understanding and making sure people are very clear on things. And then, as I've mentioned already, kind of committing a little bit of time on a weekly or fortnightly basis to provide a bit of coaching and mentoring for your team can be really beneficial, both for them and for you. And then the last one is change, and this is probably one of the most relevant in the current climate. Mo's obviously covered a bit around the change in the communication piece already, so I've just got a couple of things to add from a psychological perspective. I'm sure many of you know that often it's not the change itself that can be a concern or a difficulty for people. It's the way it's managed and the way it's communicated that can have either a really positive or on a really negative impact. So things to be asking your staff can be, what do they need from me, again, to navigate change? So thinking about different personality types. I know that I'm very much a detail person, and so in the past I may have felt a bit stressed and a bit out of control if I haven't known the details of a change that's going to happen. But some people aren't like that. They just need to know the big picture and the long-term vision, and they'll be happier with that. So be aware of what the differences are between your teams. And then resilience as well. Most talked about corporate resilience earlier, and here I'm really referring to personal resilience and how resilient your team are. And by resilience, I mean the ability to bounce back from adversity. So the good news is resilience is like a muscle. It can be exercised and developed and improved. And then the top tip here is thinking about specific questions that keep perspective for your team in difficult times. So focusing on the future and trying to maintain that positive outlook. And there's an example there for you to have a look at. Okay, so you may be thinking, wow, that's quite a lot to think about. How am I going to keep all this management stuff front of mind and make sure I deliver it all for my team? And what I really believe is that you first need to think about yourself. It's much easier to manage your team well if you're in a good space personally. And so the last thing I want to talk about for the final minute or two is to look after your own well-being and how to be kind to yourself. So just have a drink of water. Thanks. So this second model that I wanted to share with you is a really simple model that helps you concentrate on you. It's the ABC of our basic psychological needs. And how we meet these needs doesn't really matter. It could be through your work life or your personal life, and it's actually different for all of us. So autonomy is about the freedom to control things around us. There's many things at the moment that we can't really control. And studies have shown that if we think things are uncontrollable and we can't exert influence over them, then we may not bother to do anything with them. But so spend some time figuring out what you can and can't control, try and let go of the things that you can't control, and take some simple actions towards the things that you can. Then in terms of belonging, that's about the social connection and the sense of belonging that we've talked about quite a lot already. That's really fundamental to our well-being. As lockdown rules are easing, many of us can meet up with friends and family. So try and prioritise people in your life and make sure that you feel valued and supported. So maintain those social ties is a really key thing to do. And then last but not least, competence. This is about feeling that we're able to really achieve things in our lives. It might feel difficult at the moment, but even some small steps towards learning new skills and getting things done can really help. So in summary, a small action around any of these different areas can really help your well-being and get you in a really good frame of mind to support other people. And now I've just got my last slide, which just gives you a bit of a summary of some of the things that you can be thinking about both for yourself and for your teams, and that helps you get the balance right between them both. So that's everything from me now. Thanks very much for joining today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I really hope this has inspired some new thinking for you perhaps, and that you can take away a few things that will help you in your job role. And now I think I'm going back to Sophie to manage the questions for us.
Yes, no worries. Thanks so much, Jen. That was really great. And thanks to everybody, actually. It was a really in-depth kind of webinar in terms of it, and some nice takers. And you're right, Jen, actually, it's a really nice way to, I suppose, end it in terms of actually the first thing is our own well-being, and sometimes just taking a deep breath and remembering to be kind to ourselves. I think it's, can be challenging for everybody in the times. There's so much going on in terms of your personal space and also the workspace as well, and trying to just sometimes take stock, I suppose, and stop. We've had quite a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to just kick off with them, if that's all right, from the panelists and stuff. And I think there's some more coming in as well as we just speak right now as well. So one of the first questions I've had as well is, and this is to all of you, I suppose, is how do you expect businesses to behave in terms of adopting the appropriate measures to ensure safe to return to the workplace when there's already evidence of, I suppose, people not quite acting in the most responsible way in terms of going back to the office? Phil or Mo, I suppose that might be.
Irresponsible businesses, who would have thought? That is a hard one. I think people are struggling. You know, I understand that people are struggling in how to do it. Some may not be adopting a particularly formal approach to it, but my instinct here is we're living in a very different world. The reason for doing this is a health crisis. It's a health pandemic. And given that people are responsible for their own health and safety, I would hope that employees are feeling empowered to speak up. People shouldn't feel pressured to go into a workplace that they feel is unsafe, that they feel their safety is compromised. And I think that if people feel strongly enough about it, they will speak up. I'd be interested to know the examples of what's been noted as happening.
Maybe if anybody's got any of those examples, they can pop them through on the chat, and then we can just kind of go through it from that point of view, I suppose, from there on. This is probably more directed at Jen. Someone's coming in here and saying, are there any tips on how to support furloughed staff whose primary concern is job security and their finances? So in terms of managing your staff from that one-to-one point of view, what would you say are some tips, I suppose, in managing those conversations and that engagement with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something that I'm sure lots of businesses should be thinking about. I think it depends what you've agreed with your staff up front in terms of what your protocol will be in keeping in touch during the period of time with the furlough, but you absolutely want to make sure that they don't feel excluded from what's happening in the workplace, because some of the stuff I've been reading recently is about making sure people are included and that you don't get two kind of separate factions of people, which potentially when the furloughed people come back, then you may end up with kind of silo working. So making sure that you're keeping people included as far as possible without them working under the kind of guidance that you've got within your business would be really important. And I think if there's anything businesses can do to alleviate anxieties, I know it's difficult because you won't be able to give any direct answers, I suppose, around some of the questions people might have about what's going to happen to my role in the longer term. But if you can just keep the communication going and make sure that they've got the reliable information coming through from you as their manager, and somebody that they can speak with and feel supported by and trust them to give them the right information as and when they need it, I think that's probably the best things I can think about for now.
No. All fair comments back. Sue's made a really good comment on here as well, and she said it's interesting from smaller companies who will be maybe struggling more on the revenue stream and how actually they manage that distributing of equipment and the cost implications of that, and also from the organisations that are maybe working in shared workspaces and that kind of contract that actually they can't redistribute their furniture. And I suppose it's how, I suppose, what's your thoughts really on that from the smaller SMEs and how they kind of can try and manage that?
That's a really good point, and it absolutely illustrates the fact that this is not going to work for everybody. Each organisation is different. They're going to have different financial pressures. The smaller SMEs might be in serviced offices and don't own the equipment, for example. So I think that what people have been trying to do up until now is to do their best, make people feel comfortable. And if you can't provide equipment, work with your employees to help them make the best of what they have. It could be something as simple as, just getting a cheap laptop razor, because one of the problems we've heard constantly throughout our own organisation is being hunched over a laptop for 3 months. And I'm actually looking at my laptop now. I have a monitor there, but being hunched over the laptop for 3 months is genuinely causing a lot of shoulder stress and pain, etc. So it could just be a really simple stationary item that you get to lift the laptop up, that you can, you can buy certain things like that, or helping find, helping your employees to look for cushions around the house to support their back, just so that you can do the DSE online assessments for nothing, and that should help employees find that way that they can support and find the best posture for working at home. And that's really what we're trying to do. We know it's not perfect, we know it's not great. I would suggest that as an organisation, if you can help, do it. If you can't and you don't have the finances, please do your best to continue to support and help your employees find the most comfortable way to work from home if they can.
Yeah, Jen, do you want to add something at the end?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've seen some really good resources on that side of things where people can just use things from around their house to make sure they've got the right sort of setup. I think there's some videos maybe on postureright.co.uk. I've seen some guidance, and also IOSH.
We'll maybe collate some of these. We'll maybe collate some of these websites, because a few people have asked actually for some of the websites that you've mentioned actually, Jen, so I'll put them maybe in the follow-up email and everything like that, if that's...
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I can do that, no problem.
Yeah, no worries. This is quite an interesting conversation, and it's right. How do you restart those informal meetings, you know, that people used to have by the water cooler when they're all doing it virtually? How do you, I suppose, reignite that connectivity, I suppose? And I know, Mo, you touched on it a bit, but how do you do that from that virtual experience?
I think I'll just quickly say, certainly within our own organisation, we've been trying to, some of the offices have put in place, like on a Tuesday and a Friday, a half-hour coffee morning meet, so people can jump in and out of a Zoom meeting. And the objective there is that you're not talking about work at all. You're finding out how people are, what they've got up to, you know, how you meet their cats and dogs, whatever it is, the ones that you're not meeting already on Zoom calls. But you know, it's using that as a social chat, and we've used it as a sort of drop in, drop out that's worked quite well. But how you then restart that in the office, I think it's going to take time, because you're going to be with different people at different times in the office for quite a long time. There'll certainly be plenty to talk about.
Yeah. And I think actually a lot of it will come from forums like this, where people are starting to get discussions and tips on how they've been managing it without their own companies. And I think we'll see more of that sharing, I suppose. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, just to add to that, I've also heard of people doing that, even if they're working remotely, but at the beginning of a virtual meeting, don't just get straight into the transactional stuff. Set aside some time where you know you're just going to do the water cooler stuff. I mean, it's tricky and it might feel a bit forced, but actually if people know that they've got 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning where people genuinely want to talk about stuff other than work, that maybe helps get into that structure and kind of promote the fact that as an organization, you don't just want to talk about the transactional stuff, you do also want to try and recreate and keep these relationships strong.
This person actually just had to leave, but it's an interesting one, I suppose, more from that circular economy point of view as well. And then someone has put in it, one of the furniture distributions, I believe. Have you considered the environmental impact of using this perspex and acrylic in the workplace? So when these times might be finished, what will happen to that, I suppose? I know there are other solutions out there or anything in terms of that impact and what we're suggesting.
No, I think that's a good point. You know, acrylic's not an easily recycled material or biodegradable in any way. But it's important to note that in offices, you know, plan A is to continue to work from home if you can. Plan B is to work in the office with 2 meter physical distancing. It's only once you can't do any of them that you should consider any sort of screening. And the need for screening in offices is actually quite limited. So yes, of course, absolutely, we would be advising our clients to look at some, you know, avoid that if they can, and glass is a more sustainable option.
Environmentally friendly. Phil, sticking with you actually with the next one, and in terms of, you touched on it and you talked about at the moment we're obviously focusing very much on the 2 meters because that's what we're all working to, but we're looking, if you look across the globe and the differences with people having 1.5 meters or 1 meters, what do you generally think the impact will be if there's a change, for example, even, you know, which undoubtedly will come over a period of time, and the impact on that and implications for businesses?
Yeah, well, the easy answer is if we go to 1 meter, then office capacities will obviously increase. And looking at our own office, we were thinking that our open plan areas would be at like 75% capacity. Now, 14 weeks ago, that would just have looked like a really busy day in the office. So I think the worry that we have is that as things start to look like they used to, we need to be careful and vigilant that people's behaviour doesn't go back to the way it is. So, you know, on common areas, accessing, egressing spaces, we just need to make sure that employers are staying vigilant and communicating with their staff on a regular basis, reminding them where we are.
Yeah. Okay. Got time for just one more question on here. Sorry, there's a few, and I'm just trying to flip through as much as I possibly can. Oh, actually, Mo, this is probably more from a practical point of view as well. Susan was asking, you gave some names of some programs for online booking systems.
Yep.
What you were doing, and I suppose it was just like, what are these? How do they work? Are they, you know, are they free? How do you access them, etc., etc.?
Are they free? Nearly. Some of them are nearly free. People might be. I just wanted to mention that because people might be used to the kind of establishment booking systems that are great, and if you have an establishment booking system in your office, it's probably quite costly, but you can redeploy that quite easily. It's for people that don't have it, but there's some good ones. Some weirdly, I can't remember the names. One that we're looking at is Matrix. I know that's definitely one, and I think that one's got a bit of a government subsidy on it at the moment, so it's not expensive. It's, you know, a couple of pounds or £1 a month per desk. And if you're just using it in the short term, it might be a viable option. But I'm happy to put a couple of those names down on whatever we send out to everybody at the end, if that helps.
And there's some of those things, if people, I suppose, from that budget point of view, aren't looking at it, could create their own kind of online checklist and stuff that they do. And yeah,
you can do stuff through Outlook. It's just that there's a bit of functionality, additional functionality and visibility that it might work for some smaller organizations. It might not be brilliant for others. One size does not fit all, but there's options out there, and they don't need to break the bank.
Okay. Guys, I'm going to start to just wrap that up now because we're approaching the 2:30 mark, and I know obviously as everybody's got busy lives. I hope everybody really enjoyed that webinar. I certainly did, find it really useful, particularly a lot of the stuff that Jen touched on it as well in terms of that, and I'll take a few good pointers away from that, Jen. We have hopefully recorded today's session, so we will send everyone a copy of the recording and the presentation slides. And also as well, I know we talked about a few of those online bookings or some of those sites that Jen recommended as well. We'll make sure we include all of that in our follow-up stuff as well. But if you've got any questions that weren't covered, because I couldn't get through all of the ones, I had some of the ones offline as well, please do contact all of the speakers individually. They'll be more than happy to kind of get back to you and have a conversation. And I think the important thing here is to keep this conversation going. As I said, we all need to share from one another and learn from one another as businesses. To kind of succeed and come out of this all successfully at the other side, I suppose, into our life as a new normal. So with that, I will let you all go on and have a wonderful afternoon, and hopefully you can join us again next time. Thank you very much.